Good evening, everybody. I hope you're all doing well this evening. We are going to go ahead and get started into chapter 3. It's what we're going to end up doing this evening. I am trying to make certain here. Let's see. Want to make certain that we've got everything ready for class this evening. We're going to go and pull up the contract because we're going to be referencing this a lot this evening. So give me just a minute here. All right, perfect. Blow that up a little bit more, make it a little bit easier for everybody to see this evening. So with that being said, let's go ahead and jump to our PowerPoint real quick here. Tonight, we're going to be discussing basically the parties, the property, and the money. And like I was stating earlier, the parties, the property, and the money is basically going to be your first few paragraphs of the 1 to 4 family. Okay, so the objectives that we're going to try to complete this evening is going to end up being that number one, we're going to list the information that's required to complete the contract forms. We're also going to fill out the paragraphs 1 through 3 of the 1 to 4 family residential resale contract, as well as being able to identify the provisions within them. And we're also going to identify which items should be included in the non-realty items addendum. Further, we're also going to fill out the financing addendums. So we're actually going to go through the third-party financing addendum, the loan assumption addendum, the seller financing addendum, and the addendum for release of liability on assumed loan and or restoration of the seller's VA entitlement. Okay, so tonight we have a pretty much busy night that we're going to be getting through, but the material that we're going to be covering this evening is going to be very important to your everyday practice as a real estate agent. Okay, you will need to know how to complete these forms so that you are going to be capable of representing your clients without having issues. Okay, that's the main purpose here. So, in regards to our first item here is the information needed to complete your contract forms. Now, within the textbook or the workbook, there is a worksheet that's on page 29 of that text. Now, dealing with the textbook, we're not going to so much worry about this particular worksheet, simply because of the fact is that the worksheet is actually going to change by your broker. Okay, so we're not too much worried about this particular form. We're going to go through and actually talk about the forms, and you can make your own worksheet, but you do not have to utilize the worksheet that's within the text, okay? I want to make that clear. Now, the very most important thing when dealing with any form, okay, and I'm going to put that up here. Give me just a second. I want to put the form back up here. Is this part up here at the very top, okay? This part right up here is very key to making certain that you're utilizing the correct forms. Now, as you can see here, this form has ended up, it has been promulgated by the Texas Real Estate Commission. Therefore, you can see the logo here, the Texas Real Estate logo. You can also see the Equal Housing Opportunity logo. Now, both of those logos provide you with the assurance that this is a real contract. Now understand that the promulgated forms, as you can see, is at the very top. Therefore, it is the form that is going to be utilized by licensed real estate agents. Now, you will notice the second main bolded area is going to be the 1 to 4 family residential contract. And this, if you notice, is going to be in quotations of resale. Okay, so we're not talking about a brand new 1 to 4 family home. We're talking about a 1 to 4 family residential resale home. It means that the property has been owned previously, and therefore this home is actually going to end up, it is a resale home, okay? Now, one of the key things that a lot of real estate agents make mistakes on is this very next line right here, okay, at the bottom right here. The notice not for use of condominium transactions, okay? Extremely, extremely important, okay? When we're talking about the notice not for the use of condominium transactions, this form should not be used for condominiums, period, okay? So in this particular situation, we want to ensure that these properties are going to ultimately be utilized for homes and not condominiums, okay? In that situation, it is extremely important that when we are going through these different situations, we have to make certain that we are fulfilling our obligations of the forms that we're using. One of the things is I can tell you as a real estate agent or as a broker, as I review contracts, one of the key areas that I see most of the time is that the notice here, that even though it's at the top of the form, it oftentimes it gets lost, okay? It ends up being lost where it's not being utilized properly, okay? So in that situation, we got to make certain, can you tell them it's time to, in this situation, you got to make certain that we're utilizing the correct forms, okay? We have to make certain that we are reviewing these forms properly. We have to make certain that we as real estate agents, that we have to ensure that the forms that we are using needs to be utilized properly. So for example, give you just probably the easiest way to help you understand this. When I was a real estate agent, I was brand new. I didn't have a lot of guidance. I mean, I had my broker, of course, that I could go talk to, but a lot of the times the broker was busy. The broker had things going on. And so I had to end up figuring out different forms and understanding different concepts because it was my duty, okay? So again, I had to go through and I had to understand these different forms. And so in these particular situations, I utilized the condominium form, okay? I was actually, one of the times I remember actually, I had a client. My client ended up, he was purchasing a house or purchasing a condominium. And so me not knowing any better, I grabbed this form and I filled it out. Okay, I grabbed this form, started filling it all out. Well, the problem with this particular situation is that since I filled this entire form out, and remember it's 9 to 10 pages, I completed 9 to 10 pages, and in this particular situation it ended up, I wasted my entire time because this form is only utilized for a residential house, not a condominium, okay? So you have to make certain when you're dealing with these situations that we have to ensure that we are reading the forms and their titles, because if we just bypass through this and start filling the contract out, you may have spent an hour filling a contract out to find out that that form is not the right one, okay? And that's not good. I can tell you for a fact that when I drafted mine, I wasted about an hour to an hour and a half trying to figure out how to fill this form out. By the time I was finished, guess what? I had wasted that time because it was a condominium my client was purchasing, and this says right at the top, not for use of condominium transactions, okay? So you have to make certain that you're utilizing the right forms. Another time that can occur is a lot of people will utilize this form for new homes. They just see 1 to 4 family. Okay, there's 1 to 4 family. That's the form I need. Okay, or they'll get in just a repetition. I'm doing contracts so much, and I've been using this one all the time, so I'm just repeating myself over and over and over again. And what ends up happening is I complete this form, and what happens is this form is not fully completed, or it's not completed right. The worst thing you can do, had this happen when I was a new agent, completed a form. Every other transaction I've done, I've used this form. Took this form, I sent it out, sent it over to the other agent. Other agent gets it, calls me up, says, Justin, what are you doing? So what are you talking about? This is a new house. Yeah, I sent over the contract. No, you sent over a 1 to 4 family resale and it's a new home. This is for a resale. This isn't for a new home. Even though everything is almost identical in it, doesn't count. I had to redraft the paperwork. Okay, so I'm trying to save you from having to draft or redraft your paperwork. Now, that's why it is important, like we said within the PowerPoint, that you need to know the form's title, what their intended use is, and any type of possible notice of non-intended use. So as you can see, we look at the main 3 factors, and the next most important factor comes back to this situation here. Is this little date up here? A little date, okay? We have to make certain that this date is actually the current and most newest form, okay? We have to make certain that we are utilizing the correct forms. I cannot tell you how much in these situations that these are going to be very important. You have to ensure that the forms are going to be the updated information. If you're using outdated forms, of course, we've already discussed this, you can get fined, you can get suspended and revoked if you're not fulfilling your duties, okay? Now, with that being said, we're going to go on and focus, of course, on the 1 to 4 family residential contract, paragraph 1, which is the parties. And you'll notice in some of these situations, as we're going through, we're going to be talking about the addition to the names and the licensees that will be needed to furnish their marital status, as well as any type of legal entities that needed to be added. So, for example, again, like I said, tonight we're going to be doing a bunch of jumping back and forth throughout this evening. But we want to start and look right here. I'm going to start looking at this main paragraph right there. Now, while it may only be 2 sentences, it's the 2 most important sentences in the entire contract, okay? Because of the fact here is, as it states, paragraph 1 is the parties, and it's the parties to this contract are blank seller and blank buyer. Seller agrees to sell and convey to the buyer, and the buyer agrees to buy from the seller the property that is going to be defined below. Now, it is extremely important as a real estate agent, number 1, that you don't guess how to spell names, okay? If you don't know how to spell Justin, then you need to just say, hey, Justin, how do you spell your name? You have to make certain. Now, of course, Justin is a relatively easy name to spell, although I have seen it one time spelled Juston. So I have seen that, just ton. But again, majority of the time, what happens in this particular situation is we got to ensure that the people's names in these blanks are going to be spelled correctly. Because here's the reason. Here's the most important reason. What happens is if I were to spell, say that I'm the seller, and you put Justin Nobels. I've had my name spelled like that. Nobels. Okay? Whatever is wrote on that line by the seller is how the deed's going to be drafted. Okay? So whatever names you put on those 2 lines, that is how the deed is going to be drafted, and that's how all the financing instruments is going to be drafted. That's how basically everything is going to be drafted. It's based off whatever you put in those lines. Another thing is, real estate agents will do this. This is a big no-no, okay? Say, for example, that Mr. Darren, let's say that Darren McLean, he has, say his name is Darren Stephen Scott McLean. It's a very long name, okay? And his wife is purchasing a house or representing him in a sale, and his wife, Miss Heather, says, I'm just going to do Darren McLean, okay? While she's doing that, what she's doing is she's being smart. She's putting Darren McLean up here, okay? But what's happening is if there's another person called Darren McLean, they could challenge ownership. That's why it's imperative that you put the person's full legal name. No matter how long it is, you put their full legal name. Okay? Now, in normal practice, what happens every day is everybody just throws their first and last name up there. That's normal practice. That's what real estate agents do. But if you want to provide your client with superior care, you want to put their full legal name. Okay? But again, 99.99999% of the time, they're only going to put Darren McLean. That's it. But for testing purposes, you're to put their full legal name. I want you to understand that. Okay? I try my very best to put my client's full legal name. I try my best to put it always on there. But sometimes I'm having to get an offer in ASAP, and I don't have time to go and get all that information. Okay? Real estate can be a very much pressured field, and if it's a pressured field, guess what ends up happening? You're going to be up a creek without a paddle. Okay? Now, the next thing that you need to understand here, what happens, Mr. Eugene, if Mr. Stahl comes up to you and he says, Mr. Eugene, I would like you to sell my property, and I would like you to sell my property, but it is owned in Stahl Investment Group. My question, Mr. Eugene, what are you going to put if he's the seller? What are you going to put in line or blank one there? Travis Stahl, or what are you going to put in there?
I guess it's Stahl Investment.
CAD says it's on.
Travis is exactly right there. It's whatever the CAD has, which is CAD means County Appraisal District.
Oh.
So the CAD, if the CAD has it down as Stahl Investment Group, LLC, then that goes in that first blank there. If it has Travis Stahl, DBA, Stahl Investment Group, what do you put then, Mr. Eugene? Exactly what he just said. Exactly what was just put there. You have to put word for word what's in there. Okay? So when you're filling it out, like I tell people all the time, what's in CAD needs to match your contract. Okay? So when you're filling these forms out, you go in and you put in the information in the CAD or in here. Because not only does the information that you put in this first line is going to be the person there, but it's also going to follow that person from here on out. It's going to be on their credit reports. It's going to end up being in the loan documents. It's going to be on the deed. And then once you sell the house, you're going to get into appraisals and taxes and all that. So whatever you put here follows that person from here on out. So if you, Mr. Stahl, put for me, Justin, Justin, Nobels, instead of Nobles, Nobels, okay? Guess what happens to my deed? My deed's going to have that. All the financing instruments are going to have that. The county appraisal is going to have that. The taxes are going to have that. Everything from here on out, I've got to spell my name based upon his error, his mistake, okay? So it is imperative in those situations, and in real life, what will happen actually, Mr. Stahl, if you were to do that, for example, what would happen is, when we go and sit down at closing, here I'm sitting down, and they're going to say, Mr. Nobles, Mr. Nobels, can we have your driver's license? Who? Mr. Nobels, isn't it? No, it's Nobles. Well, the contract says here, Nobels. That's not me. Well, we need to see your driver's license. Give them my driver's license, they're going to look at the two. They match them all the time. And if they don't match, guess what they tell you? Mr. Stahl, did you draft this contract? Yeah. I drafted that. Yeah, I drafted it. And then what happens? Well, Mr. Stahl, This closing is going to be delayed probably 4 hours because we got to redraft everything and have everybody come back in and sign. So everything has to be redrafted. So imagine if your client walked in at 3 or 4 o'clock and they're ready to get into their house that evening, and you misspelled their name. You might have just killed them from getting into their house that evening. You might have killed their chances of it. So it's imperative that you that you are watching these spots here, and you're filling in these spots, okay? Because the fact is that when you leave these 2 items blank, guess what ends up happening? You leave them blank, that's it. I mean, you're not blank, but you don't fill them out correctly, that's where you're going to run into issues. You always have to fill them out correctly, okay? And I spend time on that, harping on that, because I can't tell you how many times your professor up here has made that mistake, okay? You're getting a rush, typing up a contract, and I'm just taking stall. I'll see stall, and I'll start typing, and I'll go in here and I'll go STAL, enter, and I'll forget H, and I'll send it out, and most of the time, when you send it out, your client does what? Do you read it, Mr. Stahl, when you get it? Nah, nope. Click, 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 click. Okay, it's gone. So then I get it back from him and I send it. Not until closing, when we sit down, I find out that I messed up his deal. Or I've even had this before happen. My client went over there and I was talking with the title person, and we're just chit-chatting and having a good old time. I'm back here with Mr. Grossman. He's the closing agent. I'm over here. Hey, man, Mr. Grossman, how's things going? Sales been good? You know, life's been busy? Okay, man. And he's like, well, you want Dr. Pepper? Yeah, man, go get me a Dr. Pepper. And I'm like, hey, Travis, give me your driver's license. He's going to need that. Here you go, man. All right, I've already took care of that for you. Oh, man, and how's it been going? And Travis, we're just going to catch up. You just go in and start signing this. It's printed. All right, man? And we just keep on just having fun here. And we're talking. And when you're like, okay, I'm done, you give it to Mr. Stephan, we leave, and he goes and processes it, and the next thing you know, you get your title and your deed and all says, Travis or Stoll, whatever you want to call it, that's it, that's his name. Now all of a sudden his deed and his title and everything is now incorrect, and now he has to go hire an attorney to go get everything corrected. And it is not cheap. Not easy. Not cheap, not easy. So it is imperative that you watch. Sometimes if it's a difficult name and I can't look on the CAD, I'll ask my client, hey, can you send me a picture of your driver's license, please? Make sure it shows your legal name. What happens is when I get it, it has a legal name, and what ends up happening? Now I have it actually verbatim I can check against, okay? Some of the common names that are easily misunderstood is, like we said, Sarah. How many ways, Miss Linda, can you spell Sarah?
3.
How you spell them?
S-A-R-A, S-A-R-A-H, S-A-R.
S-A-R-A-A.
Yeah, S-A-R-A.
Sarah.
Yeah. There's 3.
Okay. But again, there's a lot of them. What about Shantae? Okay. What about, Juanisha? There's plenty of names that are out there. That's just some African names. There are some German names that can be crazy. There can be some names that can end up having they sound one way, but are completely different. Okay? So it's imperative that you make certain that you understand your client's spelling. One of the biggest one, going back to Darren for a minute, okay? Mr. Darren, his last name's McLean, okay? Well, when you see that, okay, that's easy to understand it. But a lot of times what happens, when you spell McLean, they'll forget one of the C's. Instead of like McDonald's, if there's a C, if there's 2 C's, they'll just put MCC. They won't put the double C's, okay? So, or my favorite one, like McDonald's, like you see at a restaurant, my favorite one is MAC, Donald. You got to be very careful with those words, All right. You may be like, all right, Mr. Nobles, you're beating this to death. You beat this horse down. But the reason I beat this horse is because, guys and gals, as a real estate broker that has new agents with me, I cannot tell you how many times I run into this issue. I cannot tell you how many times I run into this issue. Okay? You have to make certain. I don't want to be the one that when you go to closing, or if I go with you to closing and you're with me, and we go sit down at closing, because understand, it's your client. I don't want to be sitting there with you at closing, and the next thing I know, we're sitting there and we're needing to move in that evening, and they say, oh, Mr. Grossman, you spelled Mr. Eugene's name wrong. You're going to have to redo it, and we won't be able to get it done until tomorrow, so he's not going to be able to move in tonight. And Mr. Eugene closed this morning on his property, so now he has nowhere to go tonight. All the stuff, I've had that happen, by the way. All my client had everything in their U-Haul at the title company. They were at the U-Haul at the title company, ready to go, and they ended up, they said, oh, no, we spelled it wrong. It's going to be the next day. My client was like, where do I go? There's a Ramada Inn that way, and Hotel 6 that way. That's all you can do. And guess who ends up paying for that night? You. You do. Okay? So in that situation is you have to understand that it is your responsibility to make certain that you're looking at this. That's one thing that a lot of people, Miss Linda can tell you back there. Miss Linda can tell you, a lot of people don't like her. She's not the person that's most liked. It's not because she's mean. It's because the fact of the matter is she goes through this with a fine-tooth comb. Guys and gals, I'll tell you, you need somebody like that in your firm. You need somebody that's going to go through that contract with a fine-tooth comb. Okay? Because the fact is it's two pairs of eyes. It protects you, and it ends up protecting the brokerage. Okay? Now, let's move to our next element here. All right. So, we talked about legal entities and how they will be identified. We talked also about couples. Now, on the exam, remember, even though in real life, if Mr. and Miss Stahl are purchasing a house, we're not really going to say Travis Stahl and Elizabeth Stahl, comma, husband and wife. We don't actually say that. Okay? We actually just say Travis Stahl and Elizabeth Stahl, period. That's all we put. But on the test, they will ask you, and the reason they talk about this and we spend time is because in certain states, you actually have to furnish the full marital status. Texas is not one of those. Okay? But on the test, they ask you, you have to state the full marital status. Okay?
Can
Again,
you put Travis and Elizabeth Stahl, or do you have to put both
has
last
to
names?
be
Okay.
separated. Yes, sir. So it can't be, like you said, good question. It cannot be Travis and Elizabeth Stahl. It actually has to be Travis Stahl and Elizabeth Stahl.
But it has to be Travis and his, if he has a middle.
If you have his full legal name,
Yeah, it's a full.
you'd put the full legal for both.
For both?
Yes. So you would not say, Travis, what's your middle name?
Joseph.
Okay. So in that situation, we would say Travis Joseph Stahl, and we would, if we put his, we need to put Elizabeth's name as well. You see what I'm saying? So you want to keep them consistent, huh?
Nothing.
Now, in regards to legal entities, they have to be identified. They must be identified, okay? And we have to end up making certain, now this is the key part, and this is where everybody makes mistakes. Mr. Eugene, I heard you a minute ago, we were talking about Stahl Investment Group. You said, okay, we'll just put Stahl Investment Group. No. Because the fact is, you don't know if that's a corporation, you don't know if that's an LLC, you don't know if that's a limited liability partnership, or you don't know if it's a sole proprietorship. That's why it is extremely, I cannot emphasize this much, it is extremely important that you dictate or you designate what type of corporation it is. Just like with my business, Nobles Realty Group, comma, LLC. Okay? Nobles Realty Group, comma, LLC. That means I'm a limited liability corporation. But if I just put Nobles Realty Group, it's incorrect. It ends up in that situation is I do not get the protections that the LLC provides me because I did not put it. Here's something else that I want you to be aware of, okay? You got to be careful with limited liability partnerships, or limited liability corporations, actually. You got to be careful with them. And this is something, even my agents that are here, you have to state it as it has been filed with the state. So say, for example, that my company, Nobles Realty Group, LLC, is how I refer to it on a daily basis. But when I filed my stuff with the state, it says Nobles Realty Group, comma, a Texas limited liability corporation. If my
Better not.
Better
not have done that.
I didn't do that on that one. I didn't do it on this one. But there are some of your clients that they'll tell you, well, I have an LLC. That's wonderful. That's great. But the question is, how did you put it on the birth certificate, which is the creation form? What did you put for the name on the birth certificate of the business? So if your client says, well, I just always say Nobles Realty Group LLC, okay, well, that's wonderful. But what's on the filing with the state?
Would you still put that in paragraph 1 if it said LLC on whatever form that's like a property is under?
So if I get on the CAD, say for example, we'll pull all this up because these are good questions, valid questions here.
So even if like you said, like this property was under a Texas limited liability corporation or whatever.
Yep.
But when you bought it, put the buyer as LLC.
So
would
you're
you still
saying
put LLC to sell it?
so
That's what was the
if the CAD, so if I filed
Mhm.
my stuff with Texas and I said Nobles Realty Group, comma, Texas Limited Liability Corporation. But when I bought this property, I just put Nobles Realty Group LLC.
Mhm.
It's going to be registered with the CAD as Nobles Realty Group LLC.
So is that what you put for seller?
So I would have to put, I'd follow my CAD. So I would put Nobles Realty Group, comma, LLC.
Okay.
Now, the key thing in this situation, however, is this, is that from now on, though, I need to fix that.
Yeah.
Because I need to follow, it's just like your legal name, what's on your birth certificate. That needs to match exactly what's on all your contracts. But a lot of people get very complacent and they end up in these situations, they just put short names because this is their whole reasoning is. If I go put Travis Joseph Stahl, you gotta sign every form with your full 3 names. Okay? So all the loan documents, and if you're a buyer, guess what? You're gonna sign a ton of papers over and over and over and over again. Your hand's gonna have carpal tunnel by the time it's done. Okay? So what they do is they say, well, Travis, we're just gonna put Travis Stahl here so that you don't have to sign your name a lot. Like you don't have to do the whole thing. You just Travis Stahl, Travis Stahl, Travis Stahl. Okay? But the problem is in this situation is that when you do that, you end up in that situation. If there's another person that's Travis Stahl that's in Dallas and you're here in College Station, they could come back and say, that's my property. And there could be an issue. For example, Miss Linda, how many Lindas are there with the same name you got? How many were alive not too long ago? And where all do they happen to live at?
Navasota.
All within the same place.
You should start looking that up. You might have some property. I should probably check that.
But see, in that situation is you may run into it. If you have a common name, you may run into those situations. But again, I'm spending time on these because of the fact, yes, I know that it's like you're beating a dead horse, but you've got to be aware of those because that's a question that's always asked of me. Now, another one, dealing with the property, okay? For a valid contract, it is necessary to have a valid legal description. Again, we've already basically put the term out there that your mailing address is not a valid legal description. 123 Main Street is not a valid legal description. It needs to be lot 4, block such and such of Meadow Creek crossings of Brazos County, Texas. Okay, that's your legal description. Okay, and if you look at the contract itself, what you will notice in this particular situation here, you look right here, this part right here, just A, deals with the legal description of the property. Okay, so you would put in lot whatever, block whatever, of subdivision, blah, blah, blah. Now, what happens, Miss Linda? Got a question for you. What happens if the property that you're selling does not have a legal description? Let's say it doesn't have a lot block, but it has a very long, just legal term. Section 1043B of the square foot of this, blah, blah, blah. Where are you going to put that at, Miss Linda? That's your legal description you see on the CAD.
First of all, we probably ask the broker, show the broker it, and ask the broker, where do I need to place that
Very good,
information?
of course. If you don't know something, you always ask your broker, but where would you put it at if you didn't know?
I would put it under the block,
You see this line right here?
yeah,
Right
there.
after the comma after block?
That's what I'm
This
referring to.
whole blank line? You put it there.
That's what I'm referring to.
If at any time, and I've had this happen before. Say, for example, that the legal description does not have a lot block. This is the proper protocol to do this. If it does not have a lot, it does not have a block. You put NA, NA. So if it does not have a lot, it does not have a block, you put NA, block, NA. Okay? Now, what happens though, Miss Linda, if this entire thing right here ends up, Miss Linda, let's say that the thing that you got to put in there is 2 sentences worth of data. Where are you going to put it at, Miss Linda? What do you think is the proper way of doing it? Ask Mr. Stahl if he can help you. So she has 2 sentences worth of legal description, but they do not fit in lot and block. Where should she put it, or what should she do? Do you know?
No, I guess known as would be the actual address.
That's correct. What you do is this. This is a question a lot of people miss. If you're uncertain and it does not have a lot and block, you put NA in lot, NA in block, and this line here, you say refer to paragraph, I think it's 11 dash special provisions.
Okay.
You go down to special provisions where we talk business details, and you throw it in there.
Extra.
Do you see what I'm saying?
That's where all the extra stuff is.
That's where all that big, well, not big paragraph, but it's about
A
four
blank,
four
yeah.
blanks that you can throw stuff in there.
The one that's always left blank.
The one that should always be left blank, that is a business detail that you are allowed to do. But you have to put, please see or refer to paragraph whatever special provisions is what you have to do, and you throw it down there. Okay? Now, when we get to land, and we'll get to that at some point, the land contracts, they don't have lots of blocks. So a lot of times it's only about 2, maybe 3 lines. But sometimes a legal description on land can actually be 4 or 5 pages long. In that situation, if you see this last sentence, Ms. Linda, can you read that part that after the or here?
As described on attached
Exhibit. So what that basically says is if you happen to, for some reason, you happen to end up running into a situation where you can't get the full legal description, you could attach a blank form that says Exhibit A and throw it in there and attach it to the contract. But you never do that without broker consent. Your broker needs to consent with that.
Can
Okay.
I'm sorry.
Yes, Ms. Linda.
Can I ask you, on A, the lot, the block, the addition, city, blah, 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 and all that. Do you get that information from the appraisal district?
It comes from the CAD.
From the CAD.
And the CAD, and I use the word CAD a lot, but it's the County Appraisal District, that we refer to it as CAD. And to get the legal description, even of your own property that you own, all you gotta do is type in, it's real simple, you just go to Google, you type in whatever county you're in, so whatever county it is in Texas, you can type, say, Brazos, And then after Brazos, you just go CAD. And you enter. And it'll pop up that county and you click property search. And you either can type the person's name in, or you can end up typing in the address. And when you do, it will spit out this information.
I was just curious.
I'll show you an example real quick, okay? So, for example here, this is Brazos CAD. Go right here to property search. And you, like I said, you can search by owner, address, you happen to have the ID, or you can even do advanced. Okay? Let's say, for example, that I want it to look up the address of, say, this building here. Okay? I'm just going to type in Twin City Properties. And we're going to look and see what exactly properties there are under theirs. We're just going to pick one of them. We're just going to pick this one right here. And what happens is, in this particular situation, you will notice here is, say, the address of the property, okay? But if you look right up here, here is the legal description. So if I was filling out that contract, you see I got block 1, block 4, J.W. James. So what I would do is I would go back to my contract, I would enter my lot, my block, J.W. James of College Station, County of Brazos, known as, enter the address, and I have now filled out my legal description. Does that make sense? Pretty simple here, okay? So your CAD, no matter where you're at, your CAD could be here. I could end up, if I wanted to, I could type in any person's name that I wanted in here, okay? Say, for example, that I wanted to see if Mr. Grossman owns a property. In here, he doesn't have it. Now, let me explain something. I use this as an example, though, okay? Say I'm trying to find out what property Mr. Grossman owns. I type in Grossman, Stephan, and it gives me this feedback of nothing. Does that automatically mean, Mr. Grossman, that you have no properties out there? No. What does it mean?
It's just not on the CAD yet.
Well, it may not be on it, or he may have it owned under another name. He could end up having his business or his properties under a holding company. He could have Grossman Holding Company, and he could put everything in there.
You spelled my name wrong.
That's why it's not up there.
I'm kidding, it's right.
But actually, it's very true, though. You'd be surprised that most of the time, the reason things don't pop up is because the fact is they misspell the name. Or, here's something also, guys and gals, I'll show you a little secret, too. These are just little tips for y'all to see. When you're typing in an address, this is the wrong way of typing it into a CAD. That is incorrect.
1, 2, 3.
You do not put 123 Main Street. You delete out the street and you just put the number and the name, and that's it. So if you live on street, lane, culvert, court, circle, any of those things, you leave that out. You just put 123 Main, and that's it. Okay? If you put those other things, this is exactly what your result will look like. It will not show up at all. Okay? So you have to make certain. Some people will say, well, if you go here by address and you put number and name, and then you put type over here and you enter all this, it'll pop up. That's just too many headaches. Okay? I just type in here 123 Main and be done. See how this has CO or CT for court? That's incorrect. You delete that out, you hit enter, and in that situation, this one doesn't even exist here. So, not even one of ours. But again, you do not in any shape or form, see like in this one, I just put San, and look, it shows San Saba or San Benito. Okay? But if you notice, if I type in 617 San Saba Court, it's not going to pop up. It has to be basically just the beginning of it. Okay? Very, very important. But does that answer your question, Miss Linda?
Yes, I was just wondering on that.
Okay? Let me go back here. All right. Now, again, in paragraph 2B and C, it describes what is going to remain with the property. Okay? Extremely important. I'm going to pull that up again. Let's put this up a little bit bigger here. All right. I want everybody to take a moment. I want everybody to read B and C that's up here real quick. It should take a minute. Read it to yourself. Read B and C.
Everyone always spells it S-E-P-H-E-N.
All right. Y'all read it all?
Not that fast.
Gotta be quicker.
I don't see the lost money though.
Okay.
That's in the exclusions.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
There's a whole addendum for it.
Yep. Broker
The
lawyer
whole lost
committee.
money addendum.
Broker lawyer committee created it. All right, are y'all finished? Okay. All right, so D ends up, the reason I tell you this and I want you to read it, because the fact is, you need to know what's going to convey, what's classified as a fixture. If you're not certain what classifies as a fixture, and you're walking through the house going, client says, oh, does a refrigerator convey? Yeah, it conveys. No, it doesn't convey. Do y'all see anywhere in B or C where it says a refrigerator conveys? No, no. So in these situations, in B and C, these are the items that automatically transfer. Automatically. So the improvements. The house, of course, is going to convey. Can't take the house with you. The garage, you don't get to take with you. Any and all fixtures and improvements that are attached to the above described real property conveys, including without limitation the following permanently installed and built-in items. It's very important. Because as we go through here, sometimes those items may not be permanently installed. Okay? So, again, it says, all equipment and appliances. Now, what's a problem with that, Miss Linda? What, when you think of the word appliances, what do you think of? Would a refrigerator fall under that?
Appliances could be a refrigerator or a stove, microwave.
What'd you say, Travis?
Coffee pot.
A coffee pot,
Yep.
microwave.
Blender.
Could be a lot of things here. Okay? But here's the thing that you get to go back to, though. Are they permanently installed
No.
or built in?
Some stoves and microwaves.
Some stoves and microwaves can be built in,
Are.
but you have to look at them.
Yeah.
But the question comes in as we're reading this, just because you may think a coffee pot, for example, the question, my next question is it permanently installed or built in, Travis? If it's not permanently fit in, does not convey. So all equipment and appliances, balances, any screens, shutters, awnings, wall-to-wall carpeting. You can't roll up the carpeting. By the way, I've actually had a client that actually was going to take the carpet with them.
Oh, jeez.
Yes. No, they don't get to take the carpet. The mirrors, and that's a big one. That's a big one, guys and gals. Women love their mirrors. Some women will spend a lot of money. I never noticed that until I got in this industry. There are women that actually go out and will spend thousands of dollars on a mirror for their bedroom, for their bathroom, their master bath.
No, no.
If they do, and they're expected to take it with them, and it is built in or permanently installed, you got to put it in exclusions. That's a big one.
Does that just mean if it's like screwed into the wall, or how would
That's where it gets into a little question, Mr. Travis.
Say, how would
They
it
screw
currently
it.
installed here besides for just
If it's screwed
Yeah,
in,
they
that would
screw it
be
into
just-
the door a lot, like on the inside when you open the, like their closet door.
Some of them will have those, but on some guys and gals, nowadays what's happening is mirrors are installed with a glue.
Yep.
And when you put it up on the wall and you hold it, it's pressured on there and it's stuck. Is it permanently installed?
Yes, it is.
Technically, yeah.
Yeah,
It is.
Technically, yes.
and is that because to take it off you would do damage to the property?
That is correct. If you cause damage, it's not going to be there. But if you are ever are in a situation where you're uncertain about something, put it in exclusions. Put it in exclusions because then it covers you.
So if you put it in exclusion and at closing, they left the mirror, it won't cause any problems.
If you put it in exclusion to your client at the last minute, say, you know what, I ain't going to deal with it, just let it stay, there's no harm in leaving the stuff. Where the harm is taking stuff that's not been included, that was not supposed to be taken.
Just
Okay.
curious.
We were looking at a house where they had a couple of refrigerators that were like
Excluded.
snag, super nice,
Yep.
expensive refrigerators.
Yep.
And so they put it in exclusions, even though they're not technically, they didn't need to.
Yep.
But they did just to be like, you're not taking them, they're ours. Like, it was
It's
just,
liability protection. Is what they're doing. You want to make certain that you are protected. If you're not certain, it's best to put it in exclusion so you've got to make sure. Now, going back to yours, Travis, you said there was multiple refrigerators.
Yeah.
In that particular situation, it is imperative, okay, that if there are going to be multiple refrigerators, that you, if, say for example, they say they're going to take one of the refrigerators, but they're going to leave all the rest. If that happens, then you must, it's imperative that you must go in and actually identify that particular refrigerator, okay? So if there's ever multiple stuff that's going to be within the property, you've got to identify what they are, if that makes sense, okay? Now, in this particular situation, we also want to talk about any ceiling fans. Guys, I've never had a client before until one of them a while back that they were like adamant that they were taking their ceiling fan. They love that ceiling fan, cools them at night, they are taking that ceiling fan, okay? So what ended up happening was I made certain to exclude it. But the problem is what happens if there's ceiling fans in a house? How many are there most of the time? Is there more than one?
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to make certain you identify where it's at. Okay? If you can get the brand, the model, and all that, you need to put it in there. Very
Could you just
important.
specify like the ceiling fan in the master bedroom or something like
You
that?
can, but the key thing is try to get a model number.
Okay.
Because I've had people before that says, well, that one wasn't in there when we first walked through, and they must have switched them out and then took it. That's what they did. It's just best to have the model number match.
Well, how do you find that model number out?
It's on the ceiling fan.
It's on the fan, yeah.
You have to take the ceiling fan down.
You just drop it. You're just taking it.
I guess the should
The attic fans, your mailbox. You don't get to take your mailbox. I'm sorry. You don't get to take your mailbox. Your television antennas. Be careful if you have DirecTV or Dish. That technically falls under television antenna. Hint. Any mounts or brackets for televisions or speakers. Very important. When you put a mount or a bracket in the wall, even though it can be unscrewed, pursuant to this, it don't convey. Period. It stays. You may not, Mr. Eugene, take your heating and AC units. I'm sorry. Cannot take your heating and AC units. Now here's that one, Mr. Travis, that you have, the security and fire detection equipment. But again, the question comes back, how was it installed?
It was just screwed into the,
It was screwed in the wall like that one up there.
but it's not wired into the building.
But it's
just
not
Wi-Fi.
wired.
Yeah.
Therefore, it's not permanently installed. It's easy to come down. any wiring, plumbing, and light fixtures, including the biggest one I get is chandeliers. When you go to a listing presentation and they have a chandelier, the first question out of your mouth should be, Miss Linda, are you planning to take your chandelier with you? And if it's a yes, then you need to take it down before I list your property, Miss Linda. Okay? Your water softener systems, your kitchen equipment, garage, see how that's broad? How that's very broad? Kitchen equipment. That's a lot of stuff in there. Okay? Garage door openers. Mr. Eugene, you cannot take your garage door opener. Okay?
It's not taxed.
The cleaning equipment. Miss Linda, you cannot take your shrubs with you or your landscaping.
What?
Mr. Eugene, you cannot take your outdoor cooking equipment. And all other property owned by the seller and attached to the above property. And that's just the improvements. Now we got to go down here to the accessories. So your window air conditioning units. You have a window air conditioning unit. It conveys. If there's a stove,
I lost my stove.
a fireplace screen, your curtains and rods, your blinds, your shades, your drapes and rods, your door keys, the mailbox keys, your above ground pool. A lot of people don't know about that one, but you go buy that Walmart pool and you put it in your backyard. Yeah, you could tear it down, but guess what? It conveys under the accessories. Okay? Swimming pool equipment and maintenance accessories. Artificial fireplace logs. And the controls for the garage door, entry gates, or other improvements or accessories. I always just tell people this all the time, just so I don't have to go through all of this. My comment all the time when I go to a listing presentation is this, is, Mr. Garrett, what exactly in your house that you have here, sir, what exactly are you wanting to take with you? Are there any ceiling fans? Or you want to take refrigerator stove? What do you want? Mr. Garrett tells me what he wants. I put it in D and exclusions. Solve that problem. Okay? I tell him everything else conveys. So if there's anything you want, you need to tell me now. Because otherwise, all of this stuff conveys. Okay? Now, D basically excludes any of the items, as we just talked about, that's listed in 2B or C. So if we come back over here, and we go to D right here, exclusions, the following improvements and accessories will be retained by the seller and must be removed prior to the delivery of possession. Now I'm going to tell you the most easiest way to make things simple. To make things simple. Take it out of it before it's listed. Exactly. Your client says, I want to take the swimming pool, or a client says, I want to take this, or a client says, get it out of the property. You're selling your property, take it to your parents, take it to a friend, whatever, get it off the property so nobody can ever see it. Okay? Because I'm going to tell you something. You leave it when we list it, and somebody's going to assume it transfers, period. Get rid of it. Okay? It just makes things a lot easier for everybody.
I have a question.
Yes, Miss Linda.
What, for instance, talking about like above ground pool, you were going to leave it. Okay, so you showed the property and showed it, and the pool's there.
Yep.
Okay, what if they don't want the pool? What do you do in that situation?
If a client at any point tells you, Miss Linda, that I do not want the above ground pool, then that would be in special provisions. Okay, so buyer does not want above ground pool and sellers to remove it, but in special provisions, your seller must remove that pool before they purchase it.
But what if they don't?
Then that's a breach of contract. And they can sue you for it. And I've had a client an issue with that before.
So you just don't put anything there, let them do it.
Most of the time is, yeah, let it be.
It's your pool.
Let it
It's
be.
your pool now. You can do it.
It's your pool. You do what you want with it. I'm not dealing with it. Okay? All right, let's go back. Like I told you, we're bouncing back and forth all night tonight. Okay. Now, adding a non-realty items that are not listed in 2C. So, for example, in some situation, say for example, oh, I keep hitting the wrong button. Hold on here. Say for example that Miss Linda in her house, say in C in accessories, say that Miss Linda happens to notice when she's looking to buy a house, she goes, Travis, she's buying your house, she walks through the property, and she goes, oh my gosh, man, that's a very unique table set. It's a very nice table set. I really like what they've done with that. That's really handy. I want the table to convey with the property. Miss Linda, my question for you is, do you see anywhere in B and C that the kitchen table conveys? Mr. Eugene, do you see anything up there?
Nope.
No. You could kind of argue under
The
kitchen equipment, maybe. You could end up trying to argue in regards to appliances. Saying that the kitchen table is an appliance. But here's the thing. If you gotta argue it, it means it's a lawsuit.
Yeah.
So what's the best thing? No. You create a non-realty items addendum.
Yeah.
Oh.
So if there's something in particular that you want, for example, what you're going to end up doing, Miss Linda, is you're going to end up right here. You're going to complete this form right here. This is your non-realty items addendum. Okay. Now you'll notice here at the top that we have an approved form. So it's approved, but what do you notice here? The word promulgated is not up here. Promulgated is not here. So what happens is it's voluntary use. It's not required. Okay? Huh?
It's outdated.
Well, no, not always. You can't go off of that date there, Miss Linda. You have to remember, you got to go back and double check
That's the date.
this form that it was effective.
Yeah.
Okay.
So this date matches that date there.
Okay.
Okay? Now, when we go in here, it's imperative that we end up, you got to put the property address and you have to put an amount in here. Okay? So now in this particular situation, we have to make certain that we are including the amount in this particular situation for what we're trying to sell. So what ends up happening in this particular situation is we've got to make certain that as we're going through this, that we are putting in a value. Now here's a key thing, and I do this a lot myself, but you have to, if you're going to put something here, okay, if you're going to put something there, what happens is we've got to make certain that there's supposed to be a dollar amount there. Does that make sense? So if, for example, Miss Linda, you want Travis's kitchen table, while most of the time in normal practice, you're just going to put $0, honestly, you're supposed to put $1 because it has to have some value. Do you see what I'm saying? So for it truthfully to stay, it has to have a value here. So you would type or write right here on this first line, kitchen table, and you would supposed to put at least $1. Now,
Would that make the sale of the house, like, if it's a $200,000 house, it'd be $200,000 and $1?
no.
Okay.
So whatever's in this form is going to be issued on a bill of sale.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
So whatever items you list in here, you're going to list the kitchen table for $1, and Miss Linda would have to, at closing, she would have her mortgage for $200,000, but she would have to bring a $1 check to pay you
Yeah.
for that kitchen table.
So would you put, like, if I wanted the the set table and 6 chairs.
Yes, that's what I was going to next.
I'm sorry.
Was it, you're good. Miss Linda, while you're talking, can you read that paragraph right there too? Can you see it?
I can see some of it.
Okay, read what you
For
can.
an additional sum of whatever amount and other and good valuable consideration, seller shall convey to buyer at closing the following personal property.
Specified
Specified
each,
item carefully
including,
included description, model number, serial number, location, and other information.
that's correct. So the key thing, as you can see here, is you have to be detailed. If Mr. Stahl has 2 kitchen tables, say he has a breakfast nook table and a breakfast nook set, and he has a dining room set, and you say kitchen tables, well, Mr. Stahl, which one can you leave?
Either one.
Either one. And he's not breached the contract.
You get that breakfast table.
That's right. He's going to give you the cheaper one. Okay? That's why it is imperative when you're filling this form out that you end up that you're doing it in detail. Does that make sense? You need to specify, like you're saying earlier, Travis, specify what it is, and it's, if possible, include the model numbers, the serial numbers, and the location. It's very, you want to be very specific. And I even take pictures sometimes. If there's a possible chance of confusion, I'll attach a picture of it to the contract. Okay? Just so that I'm protecting my client's interests.
So you can actually take pictures
Yeah.
or something and attach it to the
Yeah.
contract?
Yeah, you can take pictures. If there's a way that I think that it's going to be a potential argument, you bet I'm taking pictures. Okay? But again, the key thing here that I want to reinforce to you all is that this is a voluntary use form. And you'll notice right down here at the bottom, look at that right there. This one does not have a number. It does not have a number.
And it's not promulgated, right?
That means it's not promulgated. Since it's not promulgated, it does not have a number. That's why it starts with OP, because it's optional and it's the letter M. Okay? So in that situation this is not a mandatory form. But again, it is a form that I use with all my contracts. Okay? Now, there will be some people that will argue. I normally, when I'm filling this form out, I normally will type, I'll do this: stove, refrigerator, washer, dryer, and any and all other personal property left at the, I can't even spell today, at the property at the time of closing and funding. That's normally what I would call it. I know it pushed it over, but I normally fill it out like that. Okay? And the reason I do that is, like I told you before, is that while I did put stove, refrigerator, washer, and dryer, the last part is the most important. Because if a client in any shape or form goes over and leaves their personal property, and this is, you got to understand, this is not a lease back. If this was a lease back where the seller is selling the property to a buyer and they're leasing the property from them, you wouldn't apply that. But in a sale where the client is leaving the property, you want to include that last part, because what ends up happening here on this last portion here is this basically ends up, if the client does not move out after closing and funding, everything in the property is now the buyer's. Okay? Now, a lot of real estate agents will balk at that. They will balk at that, especially if they're experienced. The reason being is they know what you're trying to pull. Okay? But I always put that provision in there just because the fact is, if they do not end out or do not move out, my client can still move in and get access to the property and they get to keep all the stuff. But 99% of the time, at least at a bare minimum, you should include at least these items: stove, refrigerator, washer, and dryer. Now, a lot of people will come back and say, wait a minute, we got a problem. The stove is already included under accessories here. Yes, it is. But what am I trying to do? I'm re-emphasizing the importance of why I want it. Okay? Now, do I have to do that? No. But I'm doing it because where is everybody going to jump to on personal property? To that form right there. For the things that need to stay, they for some reason jump to this form. They don't look at 2B and C. Okay? Now, let's go back over to this one. When we're talking about 3A and B. Now with this one, what ends up happening here is you'll notice that that comes right here to this little small part right here. Okay? And this portion right here, as you can see, A is the cash portion of the sales price payable by the buyer at closing. And so what A is going to be is the down payment that your client is putting down. Now, if they are purchasing a house for themselves, say that Mr. Grossman is buying a house for himself, he only normally has to put down 3.5%. So for every 100,000, Mr. Grossman only has to put down how much money, Mr. Stahl?
3,500.
3.5 what?
Thousand.
Meaning 3,500?
Yeah.
Same thing. But I've never heard it said that way. That's why I got it.
He was trying to get you off guard.
Yes, he did do very good there. But if you have to only bring for every 100,000, $3,500. So he could buy a $200,000 house for $7,000. Okay. So in that particular situation, is that a good deal, Mr. Grossman? Your $200,000 house for $7,000? Yeah, it's a steal. Okay. So if Mr. Grossman's buying a $200,000 house for himself, he'd put $7,000 in A. He would check which of the financing, which is mostly going to be third-party financing, and then he would put $200,000 minus the $7,000, whatever he comes up with that number, which would be $193. So he would put in box B $193,000, and then in C he would add A and B to get the $200,000. Does that make sense? Now, what happens now, Mr. Eugene, if Mr. Grossman is utilizing both seller financing and third-party financing, and his seller financing is half of the note, and his third-party is another half? Does he have to split his amounts in this box here, Mr. Eugene? What does he do?
Just X both boxes and still put the same amount.
Yeah, that's right. He X's both of these boxes, but puts the total still in B. Okay? He has to make certain. We're not worried. A lot of people, they'll test you on the test. They'll say, Mr. Grossman is purchasing a home for Mr. Jacob. Mr. Jacob is financing $50,000, and he's getting the remainder of it for another $50,000. And then Mr. Grossman's going to pay the remainder in cash. Well, there's three things, but there's only technically two spots because the bottom one has to be the total. So we have three things, but two spots. Well, what you do is all cash portion, whatever Mr. Grossman's putting down, he's going to put here. And even if he's paying Mr. Jacob in a bank, he still combines them together, puts them as a total in B, and marks the third party and seller financing boxes. Because those are telling them that now I need to go to those addendums and I need to complete those addendums. Do you see how that works? Okay, so very important in that particular situation. Okay, now let's go. Talked about that. Now what we'll see here is the third-party financing addendum. Now you'll notice that paragraph A, and we'll get to that form in a minute, paragraph A, the buyer will apply promptly. That's very important. The buyer is not going to wait. Once a contract is signed, the buyer is supposed to get financing immediately. This is where that time is of the essence comes into play. I tell you, I've got some clients that are wonderful. I get clients that you tell them, hey, you need to get pre-approved, and boom, they get pre-approved. And I mean, it's within probably 30 minutes to an hour. I have other clients, I tell them you need to get pre-approved, and they wait 10 days during their option period before they go get pre-approved. Okay, not good, not good. Client needs to apply promptly. They also, paragraph B, they have to approve for that financing. They have to get approved. C will deal with the security, and D is going to be any FHA, VA required provisions, and paragraph E is going to be the authorization to release information. So all of these, A through E, are all going to be found on this wonderful form. Because I know you are just enjoying me jumping back and forth all day today.
Have a great time.
Wonderful, right?
Yeah.
Here's your third party. All right, here's third party addendum.
That's how we do.
Now looky here.
That was
Looky
that one's
here.
expired.
What's this one say now?
Promulgated.
It's promulgated. So Mr. Grossman, is this one going to have a number at the bottom? Let's go down here and looky here. There's a number. Okay. So if it's promulgated, it has a number. So again, we put our street address, and here are your paragraphs that you're going to end up having. Okay, you're going to have your numbers and all. Now they end up using paragraphs back on the slides, but here we're actually using numbers. So the very first paragraph is going to be the type of financing. Now your client can actually, a lot of people get this confused, your client can actually have conventional, they can have an FHA, they might even have a VA. Your client may, if they're under conventional, may have both a first and second mortgage. There's many different ways on how this form can be drafted. One thing I want to explain to everybody on this form is that when you're completing this form, you do not just willy-nilly go in here and fill in stuff. I'm going to go in here and I'm going to put this number, put that, and exceed this, and put this, and put that. You don't know the terms of their contract. Say, for example, that you end up putting 3% on A1 for interest not to exceed. You put 3%, and your client is 4%. Guess what? This kicks in, and the whole deal's done already just when you draft it. Do you see why it's extremely important that your client gets what?
Pre-approved.
Pre-approved. Because if they're pre-approved, what do you already have? You got all the information. You're ready to draft the form. So if I go out there and I go show Mr. Jacob a ton of properties, for example, and I say, you know, Mr. Jacob, don't worry about getting pre-approved. No big deal. Let's go just look at a bunch of properties. What happens in that situation is if he finds one that he loves, and I don't have a pre-approval, and I've never worked with him before, guess what? I'm just guesstimating here. Okay? And if I do that, I could already kill the contract from the moment I sent it in. Okay? You want to make certain, and that's what you try to relate to your clients is, I understand you don't want to get pre-approved. But understand in the same situation, if we don't get you pre-approved and you find the house of your dreams, I may have to wait 24 to 48 hours to get the terms so I can fill out your third-party financing. And most of the time, when you find the house of your dreams, how quickly does that normally go, Mr. Stahl?
Very quick.
Quick. Okay? You don't got 24 hours. You don't even got 1 hour. You got minutes. Okay? So in that situation it is imperative that your client gets pre-approved. That's why I tell people all the time, I'm not just going to show you houses. Okay, I don't get paid for that. I will show you houses when you're pre-approved, or I know I've worked with you before and I know you can get pre-approved. I'm not just going to, if somebody calls me offline and says, hey, I want to look at 123 Main Street, I ain't going to just go show it. Sorry, not going to do it. Not worth my time. Okay? Because the fact is I've had it happen so many times where I've showed properties, spent all this time, and then they find the house they want. I'm like, okay, well, we're in a bidding war. Where's that pre-approval? Oh, I haven't done it yet. Huh, well,
There goes the house.
there goes the house. We lost it. You should have done what I said. So again, you'll notice that under this paragraph 1, the very last thing before you go to A, it says check applicable boxes. Meaning it can be multiple boxes. It doesn't have to just be one. Okay? Another key thing in this situation that agents make this mistake all the time is they come in here and guess what they end up doing? They see conventional financing, they go in and start filling everything out, but they don't check the boxes next to it. Just because you fill it out, you don't check the box, that doesn't count. You may check third-party financing, and there's the third-party financing, but if you didn't check these boxes in here, it don't count. Okay? So it is imperative just because you fill stuff in, if it's not checked, it does not go part of that contract, period.
So will it become voided?
No, it won't. It'll basically, say you filled everything out, but you didn't check any forms or check any boxes, that whole blank, even though it's filled out, in a court of law, it's blank. Because you didn't X the boxes. See the problem? So again, extremely important that you're aware of those situations. Okay? Now B, of course, deals with your approval of financing. And guys, this one is, I'm going to say this. This is extremely, extremely important. Okay? Paragraph 2 is huge. And I'll tell you why. I had this happen. It only could happen to me because just how my luck is. But I had a client that I was working with. One of my agents was working with me, and we were going through it together. And I was on the board of directors. I was on the board of directors, and this lady was our executive director. And we had found her a house that she loved, got it under contract, did everything by the book. Everything was perfect. And we put, just because of normal, everyday procedures, we put 21 days right here in 2A, that little blank right there. Put 21 days. My client ended up, we were supposed to end up closing in 30 days. We put 21 because that's always been the norm. It's always been the norm. Went in, did our process, did 21 days. Client ended up, on the 22nd day, got fired from her job. Got fired from her job on the 22nd day. Here's our problem. This contract is subject to the buyer obtaining buyer approval. If the buyer cannot obtain buyer approval, buyer may give written notice to the seller within blank days after the effective contract, the effective date of this contract, and this contract will terminate and the earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. If the buyer does not terminate the contract under this provision, the contract shall no longer be subjected to the buyer obtaining buyer approval, and the buyer approval will be deemed to have been obtained when the terms of the loan described above are available and the lender determines the buyer has satisfied all lender's requirements related to the buyer's asset, income, and credit history. Guess what? Client ended up, got terminated on the 22nd day. Because it was the 22nd day, guess what ended up happening? This provision had already lapsed. We didn't object. Client now no longer has contingency. Client no longer has contingency. What's the problem with that, Mr. Stahl? If I have, go ahead.
She's not gonna get her earnest money back now. She either has to buy or void or breach contract.
That's right. She's not going to get her earnest money back, and she's technically in breach and maybe forced to purchase the property. It was all because of COVID. Nobody expected this. I've been doing this for over a decade. Nobody has ever expected this until that one day. That one day. My attorney looked at me and said, Justin, your client technically is now in breach. She can't buy the house. She's not entitled to her earnest money. She's in breach. talk about a very stressful week, okay? Because I was trying everything to make it happen and I couldn't. So it is imperative that whatever date you're dealing with in financing, this box right here, if you're closing in 45 days, what do you think you should put there, Miss Linda?
48.
I would go 48 or 50.
No, 45.
45.
45, but here's the problem. Mr. Stahl is kind of on top of it here. You would want to put 45 here, but what happens, like Mr. Stahl already knows what I'm probably saying, what happens if they find that wasp honey on the day of closing, and they want that wasp honey removed, and they decide that they're going to not close that day, and they're going to wait 3 or 4 days? Well, what happens if your client loses their job within that time? Now they can't back out and they're stuck. Very important when you're dealing with this, that sometimes, yeah, you may want to have additional days. But here's the thing. You put, say, 50 days in there and you have a 45-day close, client's not going to sign that because they know what you're trying to do. It means that you have to be proactive to get the transaction done as quickly as you can. Okay? Now, again, security is that each note for financing described above must be secured by a vendor's and or a deed of trust liens. Okay? If there is a VA or an FH loan, then what happens in this blank in paragraph 4, you're to put the full purchase price. So while up here, let me go up here for a minute. While up here in these blanks where we have this number here, you're going to put whatever you put over here, guys and gals. Say that I put 500,000 in this spot right here, okay? And my purchase price is going to be 600,000, and I'm putting down 100,000, okay? Whatever I put in B would end up going over here and would be placed in this box here. But if it is an FHA loan, say that it was an FHA loan right here, and I put 500,000 down here in this blank, I need to put the total $600,000 because this is saying that it has to be appraised and everything at least for the amount that is the total purchase price.
And you need to make sure you go back and check that box too.
Yes, well, of course you check your boxes. I'm just using an example here.
Okay.
But again, even though you put up here 500, down here you need to put 600. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, of course, you have 5 which authorizes the release of information, and both parties need to sign, both sellers and the buyers. Okay. Now, let me go back over here. Again, we just looked at the paragraph. You do not have to worry about this in the textbook. I'm showing you a simple way. We're not worried about that. In the loan assumption, okay, this is also going to end up being an addendum. It's the seller's right to terminate conditions in their time frames, and who or when does the buyer receive their earnest money and the seller. Okay, when you end up, you go to your loan assumption addendum, and I'll tell you just from dealing with this for a while. Let's go back out of this one. Let's go over here. Loan assumption. And right here, what this form is utilized for is this form is utilized when a client is wanting to assume a loan. Now, I will tell you when dealing with this addendum, you will probably most likely only use this maybe 1% out of your entire career as a real estate agent. 1%. Okay? Very, very rare do you use this form. Okay? Same kind of concept. But the only thing you'll notice here is that we're talking about credit documentation, credit approval. The main two, A and B, the purpose of this is that what we're trying to end up accomplishing here is this. Understand, guys and gals, we want to make sure that buyer is credit worthy. Okay? So A and B is going to deal with the credit worthiness. Are this client or is this client worthy to assume the loan of the seller? Okay? I promise you, they're very strict. That's why it doesn't happen very often. Okay? Right here, under C, is going to be your assumption. This is where you're going to end up. It's where the buyer is making their assumption and how much it's going to be broken down to and who it's going to be payable to. It's going to give you the terms, basically, of the assumption. D is going to deal with the loan assumption terms. So there may be certain assumptions that are going to be cost, it's going to be a fees or costs that's got to be paid. Those, of course, are going to be mentioned in D. In E, we're going to have the consent by the note holder, meaning the lender has to agree to it. If there's any liens, those liens, unless the seller is released from liability, would probably still be required on that assumption. You, of course, have your tax escrow insurance. And then you have your two notices, one to the buyer, one to the seller. I will explain something on this form. Like I said, it's only utilized in very few cases. If you're going to do a loan assumption, you've got to make certain that you advise your client to go over and to end up probably having an attorney review this form. Okay?
So I'm assuming loan assumption is just if I'm selling my property and I have a mortgage and you're buying property, instead of getting the money to pay off my mortgage, I'm just passing my mortgage on to you.
Exactly.
Okay.
So I may have terrible credit, and you got a 2% interest rate on your mortgage, and I want to take your mortgage because it's got a dang good rate. So I come in and I try to apply, and they're of course going to run a background check, credit check on me. If I can get approved, then I get your mortgage. If I can't, then you have to allow me to sell and I have to get a loan to purchase the whole thing.
Gotcha.
Okay? But this is not seller financing.
Okay.
A lot of people think, well, I'm seller financing. No, you're not. They're just assuming your note and taking over your debt. In a seller financing, we're going to look at that in a minute, but in a loan assumption, you're just taking on. So Travis, you could say this. Hey, Justin, I'm selling my house for $200,000. I have a mortgage with Mr. Eugene, $50,000 at 2% interest, and I'll finance the other $150 as seller financing. You could do that. And in that situation we would complete this form. Mr. Eugene would check my credit and see if I could assume it. And if he says yes, then I would owe both of you in that situation. But here's the thing. 99% of the time, a loan assumption, unless you have great credit, loan assumptions are not allowed most of the time. Because they're normally, the banks want to just run a brand new loan because they get origination fees and all of that, and they make money. If you just assume a loan, they don't always make cash. Okay? So in this particular situation, it protects the bank where they get all the money and it just kind of clears everybody. But there can be, in sometimes, that a loan assumption, for example, family members. Say mom and dad, a parent, wants to end up, they got a good mortgage rate, and they want to pass it down to their son or their daughter. They want to pass it down. They say, hey, we got a great rate, we want to pass it down to you. You assume the loan, you start making the payments. Okay? That's fine. That's wonderful. But most of the time, especially now, there's always these little exceptions to the rules that you can't do. You see what I'm saying? Okay? So again, that's just one of the addendums. Very rarely will you use that form, and if you do use it, it's best you talk to your broker. Make sure your broker explains it because it's going to require some information. Okay? In the seller financing addendum, I'm going to jump over here now to seller financing. Here's your seller financing addendum. In this form, what happens, kind of the same situation. You're going to have the credit documentation, but in this situation, guess what happens, Mr. Stahl? If you're financing, you're giving me seller financing, you're going to be the one that's going to be running my information. You're going to be checking my credit. So you're going to have the credit documentation must be provided within a certain time. You have to make certain that you meet certain expectations. And then there's going to be the promissory note. While this form is all nice and pretty and neat and everything, I will advise, especially if you work in my firm, you do not utilize this form, period. Because the fact is there's so many blanks, and one of the key things that's a huge one, I'll kind of come over here for those of you that are at home, you can see this spot right here, that little blank right there, very important. See, people don't understand, we're going to get to this when we get to finance, but there's called usury laws. And under usury laws, you cannot charge above a certain threshold for interest. So say Mr. Stahl, he's selling me his property, he knows I got bad credit, he wants to kind of get as much money out of me as he can. So he says, all right, $150,000 you still owe me, Mr. Justin, and I'm going to put 30% in there. If I don't know any different, what happens? I'm going to be in debt to Mr. Stahl for how long, Mr. Eugene? Probably for the rest of my life.
I like that.
I ain't ever getting out of it.
And then your kids will be in debt.
Then my kids be in debt and everybody else is in debt, right? Just kind of is a spiraling path, basically. But what happens here is that it's imperative that you don't draft this, because what happens is if you put it in there and you fill that blank in and you put 30% and the client sign everything and the whole thing falls apart, or if they get challenged this, that percentage right there could turn around and not only get your client in trouble, but also get you in trouble, because it's against the law to charge over a certain threshold amount. So it's very important that if they're going to do any type of seller financing, they need to go consult an attorney and let an attorney. This is where you want to bring an attorney in. That makes sense. You don't want to end up filling this form out just willy-nilly and putting numbers in. Okay? If you come back and bite you, I promise you, it will come back and get you. Again, there's the deed of trust. And then, of course, your tax and escrow information here, and then the buyer and seller. Okay? Again, it's a 2-page form. Really, it's not even 2 pages. It's a page and a half. Okay? It's fine if your client is filling this out. Say, for example, that Mr. Stahl, he's a real estate agent. He's done the classes. He knows what he's doing. He wants to use this form. Great. Mr. Stahl, you're covered. But if a real estate agent comes in and they're representing Mr. Stahl, they need to advise him that this needs to be reviewed by an attorney, period. Okay? So if your clients themselves want to draft it, go for it. Go have fun. But if in a situation the client turns around and they want you to do it, you need to advise counsel. Counsel needs to be brought into it. All right. All right, now, the addendum for release of liability or the assumed loan and or restoration of the seller's entitlement. Now, the seller can make contract contingents upon being, number one, released from the liability by their lender, okay? They can also be able to get their VA entitlement restored. And what we're going to talk about in this particular situation is, let me pull that form up as well. Tell this is how contract forms goes. It's a lot of forms you got to know. I promise you, it's taken a very long time. I promise you. All right, now this one. How often, Miss Linda, do you think that agents use this form?
I haven't seen that at all.
Yeah, because here's the thing. Majority of where this form is going to be utilized is around military bases. Okay, so if you're in Killeen, you're probably going to use this form a lot. If you are in a very high military area, you're going to use this form a ton. Okay, but if you are in an area that's rural and there's not many military people there, you're not going to see this form. I've been in practice in a long time, over a decade, and I have yet to use this form. Okay, know how to fill it out, know how to utilize it. We don't use it because the fact is, we just don't. Okay, now what this does is if a person, okay, if a person is selling their house to purchase another house, this is where you get into a big mess. Okay, a lot of times, understand, a VA, a veteran can have how many active loans? One. That's it. So if Mr. Grossman here is a veteran and he has bought a house and he is wanting to now sell his house and buy your house, Miss Linda, okay, he already has an active loan on his house. Mr. Grossman has to get his restoration of his VA benefits so he can come purchase your house. Otherwise, he's got to use a regular conventional loan or FHA loan. And do you think it's a wise idea, Mr. Stahl, that he uses that? No, because what's the rate normally on a VA? Better or worse than a conventional? Better. Way better most of the time. Okay? So what happens is if they need to release their seller's liability on the loan to be assumed, then they would complete the box one. If they're trying to release their liability to someone else. Okay? If they are restoring their entitlement for the VA loan, they would check box B. So if one is being assumed, or if one is ending up being a restoration, you're going to check it. But again, the key point here is that you, as a real estate agent, need to work closely with the veteran and the Veterans Administration to ensure that he, Mr. Grossman, gets his eligibility to purchase the house. So normally, when you're dealing with veterans, I'm just going to tell you, everybody, not saying don't represent veterans. I'm saying when you're dealing with a veteran, you're dealing with the government, directly with the government. And how quickly do they move, Mr. Stahl? Extremely quickly, right?
Yeah, as fast as possible.
As fast as that wasp honey, right? So in that situation what happens is, you have to understand that a closing or a transaction on a house that's a VA loan is going to most likely, guys and gals, a normal transaction, conventional or FHA, 30 days, 45 at the max. When you're doing VA, minimum 60. Minimum. Sometimes 90. Okay? So here's the problem, and this is what we ran into back early 2000s. Okay? What we ran into, guys and gals, was when it's a seller's market, the veterans unfortunately get the bad hand. Because the fact is that if I go in with a conventional loan and I can close in 30, and here comes Mr. Grossman, he has a VA, and he closes in 60, Mr. or Miss Eugene, what are you going to end up accepting? Mine or Mr. Steffens?
30.
Well, you're going to take the 30.
It's just quicker.
But he's a veteran.
Sorry.
But he's a veteran.
Sorry.
That's the thing.
Want my money.
That's the problem.
I need my money now.
People want their money now. So in that situation, what ends up happening is now Mr. Grossman is always getting the bad end of the deal. Only when it is a buyer's market do normally veteran loans, you start seeing them pop up. And they become major because there's not much movement. But when it's a seller's market, good luck. They're not getting it. Because the competing clause, of course, now let me just put it this way. If you have cash, you beat everybody. Okay, you got cash, no matter how good your credit is, you're going to get beat because they can close in 10 days. But when it comes down to a bidding war, what happens a lot of times is, in the situation is, veterans oftentimes get taken advantage of. And it's really sad because these are the people that are actually ending up, they're fighting for our country. But when it comes down to them being able to buy a house, I can't tell you how many times that when I used to list a lot of properties, people would send me VAs. I'd have to present them by law. But when I advise my client, I'd say, well, this one's going to probably be 60 days. This one is going to be about 30. Which one do you want? Well, this one at 60 is full price. This one is 30 days, it's 10,000 less. Which one do you want? Well, I'll take the lower one because it's going to be closed like that. The other one is going to end up doing what? It's going to take longer. Okay? And a lot of times with VA loans, the seller also has to give back a certain amount of money to the veteran. And sometimes the seller has to pay certain portions of it. So it's imperative when you're dealing with these situations that you are aware of these things, and you need to understand that if you are not, or you've never worked with a veteran, you need to talk to your broker so your broker can advise you and give you guidance on how to properly fill out the forms. Okay? Because in a VA loan, what happens is, and this is where it's just crazy, who do you think actually does the inspections for the VA? Would it be a home inspector or would it be an appraiser? The appraiser in a VA loan. But in real life, the person that's truly experienced is who? The home inspector. Okay? But in VA, the appraiser is the one that values and determines if there's any issues. Okay? So again, extremely, extremely important when dealing with these different forms. Okay? All right. With that being said, that covers majority of the class that we have for this evening. Okay? That covers all of the content for chapter 3. I do understand, and I wanted to reemphasize, while there's a lot of portions in here that is referencing the textbook, you do not need to purchase the textbook if you're listening to the lectures. The lectures are going to go through everything that you need, everything we're talking about. The forms, if you want to practice with the forms, you go to Trek's website. Okay? So everything we're talking about is provided. Everything you need is provided. So in that situation, I've had people that have asked, do I need to purchase the book? Completely up to you. If you want to purchase the book and you want to read through it, go for it. Now, I will tell you that lectures may not be in order if you purchase the most current version, because they only sell the most current version. Okay? So lectures may not be in order, but the content is still going to be covered. Okay? Everything that we're covering is still going to be the exact same stuff. It's just basically neatly packaged for you in a book. Okay? But if you're fine with listening to lectures and following along like this is fine. We're going to cover everything that you need to know. Okay? So let me go ahead and we will stop the recording.